majority of the venture-backed startups in the Solana ecosystem have started. And so this is a program that we've been trying to grow over time, and it's become the largest hackathon in the world. So yeah, happy to jump into it with
Yeah,
you.
you say that kind of casually, Maddie, but I think it's good for the folks at home who don't maybe understand exactly what the scale of this is like. Can you throw some numbers on it to make it concrete for people? How
Sure.
big are these hackathons?
Sure. I mean, well, just in aggregate, winners have raised about $650 million. So just the outcomes for about, I think there's been about 150 venture-backed startups.
Wow.
About, I'd say a dozen of them are probably valued in over $500 million. So there's been some pretty big outcomes for startups in the ecosystem. But just in terms of just getting developers into the ecosystem, I think we've had 70,000 individual participants, about 5,000 product launches out of those from those participants, and yeah, in our last hackathon, we had about 1,100 submissions. So we'll see where we end up with Radar, but the growth has been really good.
That's pretty wild. I was told there was only 79 devs on the entire goddamn chain. So that's quite impressive that 70,000 have come out to this. Also, for the record, my name is
Yeah.
Cash Don. I don't know if I actually even said that at any point of this. And my experience with the hackathons is I have competed a little bit in one. I had a product that I worked on with a few friends that got an honorable mention. Sadly, no prize, no $100 million for your boy. But as the Sherpa of Super Team, and I see we have Super Team Nigeria here, India, Germany, Vietnam, and a bunch of Super Team members, we love to drive as many people as we can to the hackathon because in our experience, it is the single best kind of like onboarding vehicle for devs in the ecosystem. Not only are there a bunch of resources, but there's actual cash prizes and the ability to kind of change your life. I guess from your perspective, Maddie, is there some like what is it about the hackathons that has led them to become so successful and so large? Aptos has a hackathon, like so does
Yeah.
Move, Sui, or whatever the hell those are called. What is it that makes it so special in this ecosystem?
Sure. Well, before I kind of get into the details of kind of how I guess our hackathons are differentiated, I'd say there's only sort of one Solana. None of this works if Solana didn't have phenomenal product market fit with developers and startup
Mm.
founders. And so I think in order for programs or acquisition funnels like this to work for products, there just needs to be already a very very sticky differentiated product underneath, which is the L1 blockchain of Solana. So we'll start with that, and then in terms of yeah, there are some structural differences, and I'm not going to go into everything, but just off the bat, our hackathons are kind of geared towards, I would say, startup founders. It's kind of what we look for in terms of like who we choose for prizes and how the judges sort of evaluate projects. This is somewhat different than a traditional hackathon where you kind of show up for 48 hours in a gym or a cafeteria or something like that, or a conference center, and you sort of just kind of put together a proof of concept, which is a very sort of ephemeral experience. And those traditional hackathons are great in terms of getting people to use new technology or to experiment. But at the end of the day, it is a very ephemeral experience, and it's not really geared and structured towards encouraging basically founders to go on their first engineering sprint and to start kind of thinking about distribution and ultimately kind of launching their product through what basically amounts to sort of a pitch, a product pitch. And so basically we've built this product with Coliseum that kind of caters to running the hackathons in that way, where it's online only. It's about 5 weeks. The submission info that's required at the end of the hackathon very much kind of mimics what we would want to see in terms of like a venture pitch, in addition to your sort of GitHub repo and demo. And yeah, I would say those are some just high level differences, and I think some of the things that are yeah, contributing to its success.
Interesting. So I won't say what the implication is for the rest of those blockchains and their own product market fit, and we can just kind of leave that unsaid. But yeah, so it seems like Solana helps, but I do think that the structure is really helpful here. And for again anyone who missed it or just joined, the one of the coolest things about this hackathon that I'm really excited about is the addition of this Coliseum accelerator on the back of it, where you'll have really kind of intent mentors that are there to help you, to guide you along, and then Maddie and his team can not only invest but also help introduce you to other folks who can invest as well, which I think is something that we've really been
Yep.
missing for a while. Okay, cool. So I know we don't have tons of time, and I do want to make sure this is kind of practical, actionable, tactical, all the other good L's words out there to help people win in this hackathon. So my thought here is that we'll do maybe 15-ish, 20 minutes of me and Maddie kind of riffing on how to win, mostly him riffing and mostly me asking questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience for some questions as well. So shout out to everybody for sticking through. Let's start off with one kind of like useful frame that I think a lot of people miss out on, and you actually just mentioned it here. It's kind of treating the hackathon as an engineering sprint. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say that, and what the process that the best teams are using when they're entering the hackathon here?
Yep. Yeah, I would say, this is just consistent with good startup founders and teams early on, and in that they sort of view their product as, especially if you haven't found product market fit, is sort of sprints. So you're trying to sprint to complete getting to market with a certain number of features that you think will provide sort of that aha moment to your first customers. And then once you kind of launch that product or get those features out, you'll get feedback from your initial customers about like, hey, maybe this wasn't the right feature to build, or maybe they want this feature, or we should evolve the product in this way. And then you do another sprint to kind of to meet those demands. And so you just repeat that cycle over and over and over again. And so we kind of we have structured the hackathon in sort of that like 5 to 6 week sprint to see how teams sort of perform in that type of kind of structure, because that's really what they're going to be doing after the hackathon too, in a lot of cases. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of why we say, hey, like when you think about like once you have an idea and you have a team to go compete in the hackathon, next is sort of trying to figure out like, okay, well, what are you going to prioritize for that sprint, and how did you think about deciding which features to prioritize versus not in terms of your demo,
Mm.
and getting to some sort of DevNet implementation. And so I think in terms of judging, what I look for, and a lot of the other judges too, in terms of the rubric, is that we want to see how people decided which features to choose or not, and why you think those are going to provide again that aha moment. And so that's kind of why we say a sprint, the first sprint or second sprint for some teams who have already started.
Got it. So it's interesting. So there, it's a lot around kind of what is your product intuition and how do you think about things kind of strategically as far as going to market. It doesn't sound as much like the traction or kind of the getting your first 10 users are as essential here. Am I hearing that right? Or is there some real value in having some traction before, or is there an expectation that you might have some traction before the hackathon actually ends?
There's not an expectation, but a lot of the best teams, the way that they approach it is that they kind of create a Twitter account, right?
Mhm.
And they say, "Hey, we're building this product. We're pretty excited about it," and then put that out into the internet, and some people will become attracted to that, right? Maybe 1 to 10 people. And what the best
Mm.
teams do is they sort of are constant in communication with those first 1 to 10 beta users, and they're like, hey,
Mm.
here's what we're building throughout the hackathon. And they're constantly getting feedback from these folks. So actually, some of the best teams kind of like decide actually to launch before the end of the hackathon. And then they have, like some testimonials even, or like some case studies about some users that they feature in their product submission about some of that traction. And that's pretty impactful. I mean, that's really cool to see. But I would say it's definitely not a requirement,
Mm.
or the norm, I would say, for the hackathon projects.
Mm. Are there any like tips, frameworks, resources that you might encourage, especially newer builders, to check out as they're trying to plan this engineering sprint and think about prioritization of features?
So we have some resources on the Radar website. Mostly they're developer resources, but they can help you kind of reduce the amount of time to get to a DevNet
Mm.
implementation. And some of those resources are related to building on Solana generally, but they can be more related to specific use cases or specific tools that you may want to use.
Mm.
So a good example of this is like, I'm pretty interested to see how teams sort of utilize blinks or
Mm.
actions this hackathon as a way to sort of get to market faster. because you can basically it takes a lot of time to build like a full web app or a mobile app. But potentially, if you have a good product idea and you can reduce the amount of time to get to market or at a quicker rate, you could use something like Blinks
Mm.
to test it out early. And so we have some documentation and resources and examples of how people have sort of utilized Blinks to do so. And so that's just like a sort of one example.
I think that's really cool. So I'm going to keep a running list here of little actionable tips that you give. So the
Yeah.
first one that was, hey, if you create a fucking Twitter page. I I can swear it's my own fucking Twitter. Yeah, create a fucking
Yeah,
Twitter
yeah,
page.
yeah.
Everybody who's listening right now for your project, it's just an idea until you have a Twitter page for it, and then start to try to get your first 1 to 10 users and include that social proof in your video. I think is a nice little pro tip as well in your submission to the degree that you have it. And then
Yep.
the third one here, so it's create Twitter, get social proof into your videos, and then number three, using Blinks to kind of prototype before maybe you do the really intense engineering that'll come on the back of it. I think those are all very good tips to start. I'll throw in a little tip for folks if you haven't heard of the lean startup methodology. It's a super useful one. Basically, the approach it encourages you to take is list out all your kind of hypotheses of your product. Where are all the risk areas? What do you believe about the world that you need to go out there and validate? And then sequence the way that you build your product and the way that you go to market to test the riskiest hypotheses first, so that you learn as soon as possible, is this really a thing or not? And people can check out that book. It's like it was the Bible of Silicon Valley back when I was coming up, at least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we can touch on something that's sort of tangentially related to this that I think will help folks is just like how to choose a good idea or
That was my.
not a good idea or avoid bad ideas in the first place before you even start your sort of
Mhm.
sprint. Does that make sense to
That's
cover a
going to be
little
my
bit?
next question. So yeah, let's run into it.
Great. Okay, cool. So, I don't know. There's a ton written from a variety of different VCs or other founders about how to find good product ideas. But I think what we've seen in the past is the best founders do not sort of like chase narratives or what's hot necessarily or trending in terms of use cases in the market. That sometimes works out, but the best founders sort of are solving problems with their product that they have
Mm-hmm.
personally, or they're solving or they're building products in markets that they would want to participate in personally. So the founder is sort of the daily active user number one,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the reason why that's important is that like as you think about starting a startup, you're going to go through a lot of trials and tribulations and market cycles, especially in crypto. And so you have to stay like extremely interested and passionate about the concept and the idea that you're pursuing long term. And usually the people who kind of chase trends fizzle out at the first sign of sort of like an issue. And so I'd say that's kind of like advice number one, like to think about like what products you would use. And then that also helps you sort of like figure out who your first 10 to 100 users are, because they're usually going to be people that have the same exact problem as you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll understand the sort of the pain points and the solutions that you're providing and how to speak to those sort of first beta users essentially. And so um, and then the last thing, this is more specific to crypto and Coliseum of how we think about uh, crypto and what's going to be impactful is like we will look for products that open up sort of like new markets that they couldn't really have existed before crypto. And so the categories where we're mostly seeing that today is sort of in deepen, I would say, is sort of creating an interesting new markets. And I would say, there's really off the wall ideas that you see come through, like a recent example of this is MetaDAO. So I guess tangentially sort of related to prediction markets, but very different. Another example is OR,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of a proof of work digital currency on Solana. And so like I think that's another thing is like don't be afraid to really think outside the box and like pursue like a very very big vision that could have a very very big market at the end of the day. So yeah, hopefully that's some food for thought.
Yeah, I think it's helpful, and I think For a lot of folks who maybe struggle to be like, oh, what is like the problem that is being solved with this, that, or the other thing? It's pretty obvious if you are kind of suffering from it. So, like Hard Hat Chad, who's the founder of Or, like really believes in proof of work solutions and fair mining and fair distribution. And so to him, it is a real problem, even if it doesn't seem like one. Like I never would have thought of that as like a problem to be solved. But I think it just speaks to the value of kind of solving the things that you are really passionate about and you really believe in. Maddie, I know that you're a big fan of this phrase. I think it's in some of your blog posts. Can you explain a little bit about the idea maze and how that might be relevant to people as they think about the hackathon
Uh,
here?
yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think this is I think this is from Balaji originally.
Yeah.
I forget. I think Chris Dixon also wrote about it originally, but it's just I think in the context of the hackathon, one thing that Coliseum looks for and a lot of the judges look for is sort of this rapid iteration of testing out a hypothesis, trying one idea in the proverbial maze, kind of getting to the end of maybe one path and realizing maybe, well, that maybe wasn't the right thing, but that kind of leads me on to the next idea, and then you sort of iterate on that next idea, and you sort of just kind of wind through this maze until you find the product that has product market fit. And in the relation to the hackathons, is that like what you often see is like people are sort of a newbie crypto dev, and they just kind of want to learn how to build on Solana, so they choose one idea in one hackathon, and maybe they don't win, but they get some valuable experience, and then they kind of ramp up for the next hackathon with more experience and kind of good learning from the product direction they went the first time, and sort of pivot.
Mm.
And then the second time they get an honorable mention, and then the third time maybe they win a prize, and they're confident in their product idea to go pursue it full time. And so I think that's what we see a lot of from some of the top even founders who have come out of the hackathon. So I think Tensor is a good example of this. I think they participated in 3 separate hackathons before landing on sort of the product that we know of Tensor today. So that's why I like to write about it a lot.
I think it's super cool. It creates this conundrum. So I have famously said I think NFT ticketing is kind of silly. I apologize for the hot take. I don't mean
Yeah.
to scold anyone's ears here, but it is just as likely that I am wrong on that, and that it just like wasn't the right time for it. So do you have any tips for
Yeah.
folks on kind of how to differentiate between tar pit ideas, as they're called in startups, ideas that a lot of people that sound really nice but actually are very difficult to make work,
Yeah.
and kind of rehashing old ideas in new forms? Like, how do you think about choosing? Is this a tar pit idea, or does this have potential now and it didn't work previously for X, Y, and Z reasons?
Yeah, well, there's actually an argument. I think Mark Andreessen has this where he talks about that there actually are no tar pit ideas. They're just like too early,
Mm,
right? And so I think that's the one thing that's really tough to decide is like, do you pursue a new idea, or do you really dig deep into some of these tar pit ideas and figure out, okay, what is the history of the startup landscape that failed in this particular vertical, and like why did they fail, and is this even still a good idea? And if it is, and you've kind of done the research or have been working in some sort of vertical that's tangential to it, sometimes you come out the other end and have a pretty unique insight and actually become successful. And there's,
mm,
the world of startups is littered with this, examples of this. Webvan and sort of the delivery apps of today, like DoorDash, maybe a good example. But for that to happen, there needs to be some sort of often like technological improvement that happened that you're sort of leveraging, or some sort of trend that that has happened in society that allows you to sort of make a leap that the other startups didn't.
mm,
And so like with Web 2, like it was often like, oh, like bandwidth or mobile or things like this just weren't ready in the 90s compared to where they were in the late 2000s. And so what in crypto can you utilize today that didn't exist maybe during the ICO bubble, that would work out today. So I don't want to just, this is all to say, just like I don't want to discourage people from trying old ideas, but just in a new format and using new technology if you really understand what the problems are. But oftentimes, yeah, they just, we do see a lot of sort of like, yeah, like you said, like NFT ticketing platforms, or NFT marketplaces, or these or gig economy sort of like platforms. And so if you do decide to pursue those, you really have to just have a very differentiated way of understanding of why all the other previous attempts failed.
Mm.
So I actually kind of forgot where the original question was, but like hopefully that was
No,
helpful
yeah,
if
no. I
you,
think the bottom
yeah,
line idea of like, hey, how do you distinguish tar pit ideas? Possibly there are no tar pit ideas at all, and what is old and it's possibly worth
yeah,
exploring again. I will say, if you're building for the gig economy and you're coming for super team earn, come at the king, you best not miss. No, that's a that's a
yeah,
joke. I love gig work, and there's been a lot of cool innovations in that sector, and I'm hoping to see many more at this hackathon as well. On the idea of like what is new this time around, I think that's like a really useful frame for builders to think like, okay, what can I kind of build on Solana now that maybe I couldn't have as recently as 6 months ago, but certainly like a year ago.
yeah,
I have a list of a few things in my mind. You've already mentioned blinks. Are there any other things that you'd like to see
yeah,
people kind of take advantage of, or ways in which the world is new?
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, Blinks. I think there's a long runway of token
Hmm.
extension use
Can you just
cases that I
explain
haven't
what that
seen.
is for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is just like a new token standard on Solana, or relatively new. I guess it came out several months ago.
Hmm.
But it allows you to basically add more functionality to tokens that you launch across many different use cases. So a lot of the first ones are around payments. So let's say that you want to create sort of some sort of payments use case for merchants. Well, one thing that you would obviously need is some sort of like chargeback
Hmm.
mechanism. And basically you can add sort of like functionality into the token itself and how it transfers between wallets to add things like an escrow kind of like timing or things of this nature that could give you the ability to do something like a chargeback. Um, or if you want to do something like in the RWA space, like you maybe need more kind of controls around who can own a token or whitelisting or things of this nature, or maybe a new stable coin as well. And so I think it's a pretty generalized standard for adding more functionality to
Hmm.
tokens. And I'd love to see people sort of experiment more with that particular standard. Um, Trying to think of what else there is. There's also just like performance improvements that have happened. So like ZK compression is one thing that I'm sure we'll see some people utilize in this upcoming hackathon, and let's see if that opens up any sort of novel use cases.
Hmm.
But yeah, this is all stuff that we have featured in our developer resources that people can dig into and kind of see how they want to utilize.
Yeah, I think that token extensions, someone used to say that they give your token superpowers. So there's a bunch of like literally new things that you could not
Yeah,
have done 6 months ago. The other
yeah,
things that I had on my list, the first one is that for the first time in a long time, on and off ramps actually work, which means that you can build things that are much more kind of consumer facing without expecting people to go to Coinbase and then buy some Sol and do all this other kind of nonsense. So I think like CoinFlow, Sphere, MoonPay.
well,
Good.
CoinFlow, MoonPay, and Sphere, you think have improved a lot to or I guess like I'm curious on that point. Like I know Mezzo has also been
Mezzo is
in
good.
this
Yeah.
space. I'm curious kind of why you think, yeah, what do you think has changed over the last few months with those
I
products?
remember like a year ago, or God forbid, 2 years ago, where you basically had to like go down a dark alley and strangle the dude in order to be able to get crypto. I just think that like the payments or the experience of kind of bridging between the traditional financial system and this kind of parallel crypto system
Uh-huh.
has gotten much better. Now, obviously, your mileage like may vary
Yeah.
specifically, but if you look at apps like Moonshot, which is like a meme coin buying app that people
Hmm.
might be familiar with, you're just like using Google Pay. Cast is another cool product that's out in the Solana ecosystem now that allows anybody to get a like a debit card that you can use with Apple Pay or anything else that pays from USDC as well. So there's like all sorts of like new
Hmm.
ways that you can use USDC in the real world, or use tokens in the real world, or use token money in the crypto world that I think didn't really. I would not say it's fully mature now, but at least now there's some glimmers of it in ways that might make it easier to bring
Yeah.
some normies on. Relatedly, I will say my one of my hottest takes that all my super team friends on this call have heard me say before. I'm a staunch believer that basically every DApp should include the Google sign-in, whether it's like Google sign-in with TipLink or Google sign-in with Particle, just because
Yeah.
like my brother, smart guy, works literally at Google. Um, could give a fuck about crypto, right? And so, like, if he has to download Phantom and then use that just to try out your app, he's not going to do it. But if it's Google sign in, one click, relatively easy. So the idea of like embedded wallets, I think, also really improves Web2 UX.
Yeah.
And then one or two other things I had. One was the liquidity and yield is actually back again. Like we are so back, ladies and gentlemen. Even if the last few weeks of token price are a little bit worse, now that there's actually liquidity on chain, you can do all sorts of fun aggregation type things. So Lulo is a cool yield aggregator. Ranger is aggregating perps. Carrot is doing some yield aggregation as well. So there's just like more design space there. And then there's too many tokens. There's 20,000 tokens a day that are being minted on Solana. That's a real number, not an exaggeration. And so I think anytime you go up whatever 3 orders of magnitude in terms of the number of new things, that's probably going to create some new problems and opportunities, whether it's around token discovery or something else entirely. What do you think of that list?
Yeah, yeah, those are great. I would love to see people utilize all those things. But again, like I think one thing, just keep in mind about all this new tech, don't build with the tech for the tech's sake. Like have a business product vision in mind and use the tools that help you get to that sort of end goal, rather than the other way around that you see a lot of in traditional hackathons. So
Folks,
yeah, just wanted to call that
you
out
might
too.
be listening to this and be like, oh, did Cash and Maddie prepare the script in advance? No, we did not. But that is exactly where my next question was going to go. So I think that
Okay.
this hackathon, somewhat uniquely relative to other hackathons, as you were saying, which are much more kind of just purely build something real quick in 48 hours and see what happens, these are much closer to kind of startup competitions, right? Let's see companies,
Yeah.
protocols get built that have either venture scale or can, work for a lot of people in real ways. How do you think about the importance of the business model in people's pitch? And when should they start to think about that? Is that the kind of thing that, hey, with your idea, if there's no kind of business model or token model around it, maybe it's not right for this competition and you should be looking at a public goods grant or something? Or is it the kind of thing that, hey, build what you're really passionate about and you'll figure out a way to make a business around it later? How do you think about encouraging people around business models?
Yeah, I would say the latter. I think, yeah, I mean, like I said at the beginning of the spaces, the hackathons are geared more towards founders who are building, for-profit businesses on chain. But like, there have been many winners in the past that have created sort of public goods that, maybe just don't have an obvious business
Mm,
model. I would say, like, for the purposes of the hackathon, build what you think would be like very, very valuable for the ecosystem and that you think that you would want to continue building long term, and that you think would be a sustainable project long term. In terms of like the business model, I think some of that would need to be included depending on what the product is. So something basic like, oh, NFT marketplace, well, it's pretty
mm,
obvious, I think, what the business models there could be. But maybe something more esoteric or abstract of a concept, you would maybe need to explain a little bit about what the business model will be long term. And that's just for the sake of the
mm,
judges, because the judges are looking for sort of for profit businesses, I would say. That's what they're mostly interested in. And so I think this is sort of getting maybe into the next thing you want to talk about, which is sort of like the product presentation and what to include. But
mm,
um, I think what you want to do with the presentation is not only describe kind of like obviously what you built, technically for the hackathon, but also how it sort of leads into this sort of broader vision of what this sort of product or business could be long term. And oftentimes people touch on sort of the business model and how it can scale to be a sort of a venture backable market,
mm.
from the start. So that can be pretty important depending on what the product is.
I think maybe like an example here will help kind of bring this to life. And there's a complicated example, so I'm going to throw this on you here. But it's OR from the last hackathon. For people who don't know, as we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
proof of work coin on top of Solana, fair launch. You have to mine it to get it. What did Hard Hat
Yeah.
Chad talk about the business side of things, or how did you and the rest of the judges think about the business side of things, such that that was kind of a grand prize winner when it's not a traditional? There's no fees
Yeah.
associated or whatever else, right?
Right, exactly. Actually, I think the original pitch of what he described is actually kind of not yet public, I would say.
Oh,
So I
okay.
don't know if I can divulge exactly
Give us
what
the
he told
alpha,
me, but
Maddie. Give
yeah,
us the
I
alpha.
think I'm sure he would not be happy if I divulged it, but I'm sure he'll have announcements soon. But I think for or what was interesting about that product for us is that he had obviously done a fair amount of deep dive into just Bitcoin itself. And, Bitcoin's awesome. I love Bitcoin, and I've been interested in Bitcoin for a long time, but he had done even much more research into sort of maybe some of the shortcomings and how could be sort of product differentiation with ore. And if there was going to be product differentiation, and we know that Bitcoin has become a very valuable kind of asset in the world, um, there were several paths to sort of to grow it monetarily. One, just the fact that hey, there's the traditional sort of Bitcoin model of being a fair launch. You can mine it, and there's a limited supply,
Mhm.
so potential value just in that mechanism alone. But then there was sort of these sort of ancillary businesses that he had ideas around in the pitch that could also bring a lot of value and demand, honestly, for using or as sort of a payment method,
Mhm.
which we thought was really interesting. And so that opened up a wide variety of other sort of businesses that could be produced out of it.
Gotcha. Okay, so he did include some stuff in the pitch. It's just that
It
it's
did.
not in public yet, so we haven't yet seen it. Got it.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so that's another thing. Yeah, maybe just about the hackathon submission. That's probably important to know is that you don't need to divulge all information publicly.
Hmm.
So we offer the option to. Well, we recommend. We highly recommend that people be open source your code, open source your idea, tell everyone about all your ideas. It's not a requirement where you can sort of give access just to judges, just so that the judges know exactly what the entirety of the submission is, but you don't divulge it publicly. If there's something specific in the code base that you don't feel comfortable about sharing, or with the idea that is fundamental. So yeah, that's probably something that I
Hmm.
wanted to mention.
Gotcha. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about this kind of submission. So this year in particular, in years past, there's been the option you can submit a slide deck or submit a video. This year, I think it's a pretty clear push towards folks, give us a 3-minute video and make everybody's life easy. Is
Yeah,
that correct? Let me just start off with that.
yeah, it's correct. It's correct. I think, yeah, we're not even gonna give people the option of just a deck. Although we'll give people the option to add additional information, and a deck could be one of them. But I think we'll want everyone to create a video. Um, so I think it's just a more consumable, easy kind of way to do judge projects, but also for everyone to view projects. There's like over 1,000 last time.
Yeah, I remember digging through all those submissions. So for the video, like one way to go about it is basically just to record your pitch. But presumably there's kind of like other ways around it. Can you describe like maybe an option or two of like what an ideal video structure might include for the submission?
Yeah. So we'd like to limit it to 3 minutes. Although people go beyond it, but please try to keep it to 3 minutes. But it should basically be a very succinct and concise description of who you are or your team,
Mhm.
what the product idea is, why you think it's like going to be a really big vision long term, what you actually built for the hackathon, and why your team is kind of uniquely able to sort of execute and bring this product idea to life and expand it long term, well beyond the hackathon. And so those are broadly the things that I would want to see. And then the last thing that I look for, but I think other judges look for as well, which is just like, did you sort of like teach me something that
Mm.
I didn't know about a specific market, or why your product is going to excel long term? Like, what is that 1 to 2 things that you think that no one else? This is maybe like a sort of Peter Thiel-ism
Mhm.
type thing. Was like, what do you know that no one else knows, or like what do you think is contrarian that everyone else thinks is not the case? And so I think that's what a lot of the judges react to when I've just have gotten in like judging review sessions with folks, and when people look at presentations and they're watching it and they're like, oh wow, I didn't know that about that market, or I didn't know that there was this sort of groundswell of like particular audience that's already using this type of product that could expand to a lot more people long term. So I think yeah, that at a high level is some advice on the presentation.
Nice. How do you, I know a question that we've gotten from the super team angle is that there's a number of super teams which are non-native as like the first language here. For folks in that kind of position who maybe they understand English, but perhaps are not fully fluent in it, let's say that they live in Japan or something like that, where English is only somewhat common.
Yeah.
How do you encourage them to approach this? Because I think that all videos have to be in English. Is that true?
Ideally,
Mm,
yeah. Although we're onboarding more judges in regions that hopefully speak the language of that
mm,
region. So we're trying to solve a little bit for that long term, but for the time being, yeah, we really encourage everyone to find at least one person in your team that speaks English that can put together the presentation. So that is something that we definitely want. And I think for most startups in crypto, knowing English is pretty important. Just in terms of like a lot of the information about crypto is in English, and a lot of your customers are probably going to be English speaking, and so I think yeah, it's for the time being we encourage people to submit in English. But if you can't, let us know, and or let like if you're from a super team region who doesn't speak English, let your super team lead or folks know, and we can kind of figure out a way to evaluate your
mm.
project
Did you
for
see
sure.
anyone using like AI? This is my question because like the AI translation is getting pretty
Yes,
good. Do you have any
yes.
opinions on that one way or another?
Oh my God. Yeah, there was a turning point last hackathon where I'd say, I don't know, like 10% or 15% of product submissions were AI voiceovers, which were some were quite good.
Hmm.
So I don't mind that as well, as long as it just doesn't take away from the content of your presentation. But for some folks who just really struggle with English and you can't find anyone to help you with the presentation, this could be a good route. And I think, yeah, there's a variety of tools that help you sort of, yeah, use an AI tool to go over your video presentation.
Are there extra points for creative videos? Like, I would assume that 80% will just be people sitting in front of the laptop doing a little video. If somebody does something more
Yeah,
creative and, whatever, Hollywood production effects and so on, does that actually help at all or not quite?
I think this is like a personal preference thing of judges. I personally don't mind it,
Mm.
like where I see someone kind of like go off the beaten path of Loom and a slide deck and really sort of like come up with an interesting kind of way of presenting the information. I wouldn't get too. The problem is that if you get too creative, if it's too like much of like a hype video, it takes it doesn't go deep enough often into like what you built and kind of going into the more technical details of the product. But I don't want to just completely discourage people and everyone kind of do this cookie cutter model that we lay out.
Mm.
I want to see people sort of see if they can be creative with it if they so choose to, but just make sure that you get your main points across no matter what. That's what's most important.
Got it. All right. Folks, we are going to open it up to the audience for questions here in just a minute. So if you have something, you can raise your hand and I can try to bring you up on stage. But before we do that, Maddie, any last kind of common mistakes that you see people make, particularly people that have gone through a hackathon already? Like, are there any bad habits that you've seen folks build up that you're keen to kind of dispel right now?
Two things. One kind of related to what we were just talking about, but make sure to allocate some time. So if this Radar Hackathon's 5 weeks, um, spend 4 weeks building the product and getting to a DevNet implementation, but then spend at least like the last 5 days just focus on the presentation. Because the fact of the matter is that there's so many product submissions now that the first thing that judges look at are the presentations, even before looking into your GitHub repo. And so that's really what catches people's eyes. I mean, this is no different than real life, right? You have to tell your story. You have to get people interested in the product for them to dig into it and use it. And so, definitely do not shortchange the amount of time on the presentation. Second thing is that you test your DevNet demo or your implementation. Um, Make sure that you test it, that you make sure it works, because I think that's where a lot of people also falter is that once people are interested, you grab their attention with the presentation, and then we start digging into the GitHub repo and trying to run the instructions, and it just doesn't work. And then we have to go to the teams, and oftentimes when we ping a team saying, "Hey, this didn't work," it was just a very simple bug that they needed to fix, and that they're sort of I worry that they're just downgraded by a lot of judges because they just didn't fix the simple bug, and a lot of people would have been impressed if they had just tested it more beforehand. So those are the two pieces of advice I give to folks.
Very nice. All right. Maddie, thank you for those. Let's see who wants to come up and ask some questions. We got D-Bar first and foremost. Folks, raise your hand if you are, whether you're building or not, if you just have questions about the hackathon, you can come up here and ask Maddie himself. D-Bar, you with us? Not a rhetorical question, my friend. You are muted. The joys of Twitter Spaces. All right. Does anybody else have a question and want to raise your hand and jump up here and talk about it? Debar, I see your hand waving, brother, but you are muted, so you gotta unmute yourself and ask your question. We got Meta Matt coming up in the interim while we figure out these technical difficulties. Meta Matt, you are live on the space.
Great, thank you, Maddie, Tosh, for this great, informative presentation. This is Meta Matt. I'm from Future Protocol. We're doing our first hackathon. Maddie, my question for you, and is for me and also for my team, is how do you recommend making this hackathon feel more like embodied and participatory, like we're part of kind of a community and cohort? Like, where's the spaces to interact with people? Like, besides the Twitter spaces, I want to get my team involved with the community and with you guys and other builders and get that feel of being in the same confined space, but virtually over 5 weeks.
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think this is something that we've this is sort of a double-edged sword of running an online only sort of competition where, it's over a very long period of time. It's like 5 to 6 weeks, and you could go the whole thing and never meet anyone actually else, participating. But the good news is that Super Team has, I know, depending on where you live, certain IRL build stations that they run each time for people to meet up in person, and those are really great. And those are run, I think, by most Super Team communities around the world. So hopefully you live near one of them. If not, we have a special a special IRL sort of activation at Breakpoint this year that we'll make an announcement about hopefully this week. That we will involve that. And then the third thing is for people who are just going to be online. Maybe you live in a place where you can't travel. We're trying to add certain features to the Coliseum platform. So everyone who is building the hackathon, you need to create an account on the Coliseum platform. And we've added sort of like a new live chat. And so we're trying to experiment with that to see how people are sort of hanging out in that channel and seeing like what questions they asked. We also have like forums on the platform where you can ask questions related to, most people are asking questions about like trying to find teammates or technical questions, but maybe there's other questions you want to ask from the community. So that would be another avenue. So yeah, hopefully those are some kind of things to consider. But yeah, this is very different, like I said, than a traditional hackathon where everyone shows up in one space for 48 hours and you're all kind of building together. This is much more of a long-term endurance competition.
Matt, where are you based?
I'm based in Toronto, and our team is spread out from New Zealand, Thailand, Europe. So we got India. So we got like a great spread of the globe.
Well, I got good news for you and bad news for some of your teammates. We just launched Super Team Canada, and I believe that Simon, and I think I saw a fib on the call somewhere here. They are planning some stuff in, I think, Toronto as well as Vancouver. You have to check with them, but go check out Super Team Canada. There's going to be IRL stuff across the country over the next 5 weeks. And then for your folks in India, Super Team India, of course, I think is doing, if I'm not mistaken, 3 different build stations across the country. So hopefully your team can get involved there. For your friends in Thailand and Australia, I have nothing but bad news, unfortunately. But hopefully we'll get there soon. And if you want to start, if anyone on this call wants to start a super team in those countries, please shoot me a DM. All right, cool, Matt. Hopefully that helps, and we'll get to see you at Breakpoint.
Super helpful. Thank you all.
Cheers, man. Next up, we have, I don't know who this guy is, but his picture is very scary to me. This guy named Tron has something to say. What's your question?
First, a comment. We actually do have some activation activities in Thailand. So if you do have a teammate in Thailand, Matt, check out the Super Team Thailand pop-up Twitter account, and they'll be listing some activities that will be happening for the next few weeks. But to the question. Maddie, in terms of a continuation product, i.e., something that a team had previously built, say, for Coliseum, but are continuing building for this hackathon, what are like some advice or tips for them to make a difference this time around, so that it's something that you guys would consider?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this is sort of maybe in line with kind of like the idea maze discussion Cash and I were having, where if you've built a product and you haven't seen either much traction or you want to expand your market more or whatever, I think using the hackathon is sort of an opportunity to either pivot in a slightly different direction or expand a new product line that sort of feeds back into the core product. Is where we see a lot of success with founders. Kind of going back to the Tensor example. So Tensor, one of their first products that they submitted was sort of for this like NFT data indexing product, and that didn't quite take off. They were getting some usage, and then they realized like, well, we could use this sort of data indexing product in sort of a more user-facing product for prosumer, basically NFT traders at the time. And so you can definitely use some of the technology that you've built in previous hackathons and sort of adapt it to either a new product vertical or or a sort of a different approach. So I think those are maybe some pieces of advice to pass along to those teams.
Thank you very much.
Cool. I don't know who that guy is, but that's a pretty good question. All right, let's see. We have any other questions? We got Beardo up on the call. Beardo, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me up. Appreciate it. I actually just recently joined the Super Team Canada Discord server there recently. I had a friend point me out to them. I'm a founder of a project there. I'm not a developer. I'm not that kind of tech savvy. I'm a previous community manager for a larger project. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I've been seeing a lot of talk about the hackathon and stuff, and I know that it's a little bit different, but it does seem like there is still like a need for technical skills to be part of it. So as someone that doesn't have that kind of background, what should I be doing as part of the Super Team community to try and help myself and others?
You should try to find a team that needs a non-technical co-founder or a community manager or whatever skills that you can provide a team. Like a lot of people who participate in the hackathons are non-technical, but they're using the Coliseum platform. There's a Find Co-Founders sort of directory that people are using pretty heavily right now to find and team up with other people to go compete. And then in fact, like I think what we found in the last hackathon or last couple of hackathons is that winning teams usually have a team of about 3. There's usually 2 technical folks and 1 non-tech person. And so, yeah, highly recommend, seeing what people are building in the Super Team Canada community, seeing what people are building on the Coliseum platform directly, and seeing if, just reaching out, DMing them directly and seeing if they need, some assistance. So that's my advice.
Awesome. Thank you.
Very cool. Thanks, Beardo, and welcome to Super Team, man. It's good to have you. Let's go over next to Diego.
Yeah, hey guys, hey Maddie. Thanks for the chat. It was very Very informative. Thanks. I guess my question is how important would traction be in like community and as well in like active usage be when judging projects and for the hackathon? As you mentioned, that you kind of look to have something at least on DevNet, if not like deployed on mainnet. But yeah, just curious about that. Thanks.
Yeah, again, nothing is required. The only requirement is
So
to
how many things are required to join the hackathon?
Hold on 1 second. There we go. Raul will come to you in just a second, brother.
yeah,
Hold on. Yeah, go ahead, Maddie.
yeah, we'll answer Diego first. Yeah, so I think there's not a specific requirement. The only requirement is you have to have some sort of Solana integration. But I think where we found most teams who have done well in the hackathon usually get to some sort of DevNet implementation. Don't necessarily need to have a bunch of users or anything like that, but usually within a 5 to 6 week
Hello, super
period, we
team.
expect a DevNet implementation.
Sorry, 1 second. Just Raul, 1 strike, 2 strikes, you're out. Sorry, Maddie, go ahead. Finish that off.
No, that was about it. I think, yeah, I mean, DevNet is usually where people land. Some people get to mainnet. Some people have users. Some people even launch a token. So it's a pretty wide spectrum. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And I think this is another thing to just keep in mind. I think judges really look for sort of the quality of idea and the way that you've communicated it and the specific features that you've built early on as much more important as getting a lot of work done, like writing a bunch of code. It's not the team who writes the most code that's going to win. It's really about, sort of the holistic vision and implementation of what you've done so far for the project.
Very cool.
Unreal. Thanks very much.
So just to make this as clear as possible, it is possible to win a prize in the hackathon without any active users. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah, that there's been, yeah, especially if it's like so
Think of like Urani, for
there's
example.
Urani is a good example. There's the winner of the infrastructure track was called Rackerai. None of those made it to mainnet, had any users by the time the hackathon. I think, so that's definitely not a requirement, although it can help you, especially if you're sort of a consumer app. It could be helpful, but yeah, it's just bonus points. It's not a requirement.
Very cool. D-Bar, do you want to try it out? See if it works now? I see the 100%. Hey,
yeah, Gem, bro. So, my name is Diba. I'm the founder of DeFi Grammy. So, quick question, yeah, super team. I wanted to know if we are to jump on the hackathon, is it mainly projects that are looking to glorify the Solana blockchain, or do projects that stand to glorify all chains also look at having a percent in getting any chance in the hackathon system? Because like my project DeFi Grammy, it's not just about celebrating major things that are going on the Solana blockchain. It is originating from the Solana blockchain, yeah, but it looks also to emancipate other blockchains. So does that still count on the hackathon?
So the question is around cross-chain products in the hackathon. Maddie, how do you think about those?
Yeah, so like I said, the requirement is there needs to be a Solana integration, but if you're cross-chain, that's not that you can definitely submit a cross-chain project as well. But there needs to be a Solana integration as part of the chains that you are integrated with. So yeah, I think that's great, and you guys would qualify if that's the case.
Very cool. Thanks, D-Bar. Let's go over to Pilex. God, I forgot how hard it is to host Twitter Spaces with these usernames. Pilex, how you doing?
Hey man, doing well. Thanks for having me, and greetings from Super Team Balkans. I just wanted to ask, hey. I just wanted to ask you how relevant and how heavily judged is the team's experience? Maybe not necessarily just in Solana, but in blockchain in general and in development in general, and then in Solana, right? So on like 3 levels, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, one thing that we look for and other, obviously, VCs look for is sort of founder market fit. And so what that basically means is do you have the necessary or in-depth knowledge in the specific use case vertical in which you're building your product? And so I think to answer your question more directly, no, it's not a requirement to be like a Solana Rust genius, but you need to know enough to get to a technical point in the product where you can get to something like DevNet. But what's more important is like, do you understand sort of the dynamics of the market? Can you execute on a broader product vision even after the hackathon? To build out the product that you want to bring to market. And so I think it's more about on an individual basis, like, do you have the skills to bring your vision to life rather than do you just have like a certain level of Solana or crypto development? Now, having said that, like a lot of the winning teams have been in crypto for more than, a few weeks. A lot of them have been sort of experimenting, going through the idea maze for quite a while. So it just happens that, more experienced developers or founders do happen to win, I think, more often than newbies. But a new founder, fresh out of like a Web2 company who doesn't really know much about Solana have gone on to be winners and actually have gone on to create like really impactful companies in the space shortly after. So it's a pretty wide kind of diversity of skill sets, I would say.
Oh yeah, I get you completely. Just to add to that, so we like teams who can basically then deploy to DevNet, and maybe even have already gained experience from previous hackathons and everything. I assume that's just a good positive more than a requirement, right?
Yeah. If you create another NFT marketplace, though, it doesn't matter if you're the greatest developer on Solana in the world. So, but yeah, you're right in that.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Cool. Thanks, Felix, and shout out to the Balkans. All right, folks, I know we have some more questions. Unfortunately, we do have to start to wrap this up right now. So, Maddie, for people who have additional questions, where's the best place for them to get at you?
Yeah, Matty Tay on Twitter or Coliseum.org or Coliseum.org are our company accounts and where the hackathon's taking place online. So those are some resources. And yeah, really, really thank you, Cash, for inviting me on to speak with the Super Team community. And just want to say one last thing. I think you asked me like, oh, why have the hackathons on Solana done well compared to other chains or other ecosystems? And I think one of the reasons I didn't mention is that Super Team and that it's a very much community focused kind of hackathon and fully supported by the ecosystem. And so I think Super Team is a key reason and instrumental to how it's been growing over time. So yeah, really appreciate you inviting me on the show, and also really excited to see everyone's submissions from the Super Team community.
Appreciate that, Maddie. I appreciate the kind words. To be super clear, I was not fishing for that compliment when I asked that question, but it's nice of you to say. It's nice of you to say now. All right, folks. So if you have other questions for Maddie or about the hackathon, you can just shoot him a DM or jump over to Coliseum. If you haven't already, go register, check out the product forums. If you're looking for an idea, that can be a place that you would go. If you're looking for a co-founder, it's a great place to go, and it's just something that you have to do before you submit anyway. To recap, the kind of 5 most actionable takeaway items for everyone on this call that came out of this. Number 1, get some social, if you can, get some social proof from your first kind of beta users, get some feedback, and possibly include that in your submission so that the judges know you are iterating based on what people want in the real world. Number 2, build things that you would use yourself, right? To some degree, a founder market fit is very useful here. Number 3, leverage the new things if you're going to try out old ideas. That's blinks, token extension, CK compression, on and off ramps, et cetera, et cetera. Number 4, you want to make sure that you are teaching the judges something in your submission video. So, show it to everyone you know and make sure that they leave with at least one kind of net new insight. And number 5, this may be my favorite one, make sure you test your shit. So if you spend the last 5 days on your presentation, spend that day before that at least on testing, if not more. Maddie, thank you so much for coming out. And thanks to everybody else for coming out. I hope to see you all on the Solana ecosystem call on Thursday at 1 p.m. UTC, where we'll be talking about many more things that are new in the ecosystem and hopefully give you some ideas on what to build, who to partner with, and so on and so forth. Until then, you don't have to go home, but you cannot stay here. Thanks so much, everybody. Catch you next time.